Hello and welcome to episode 79 of the Rollo and Slappy Show. Today is February 19th, 2018. I am Rollo McFlugel, and with me is Slappy Jones 2, and we are both of McFlugel.com. The show notes page for this episode is McFlugel.com/79, where you'll find links to subscribe to this podcast, as well as other ways to check us out on social media and all that other good stuff. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Slappy, and he's going to introduce our topic for this episode.
Thank you, Rollo. Thanks, everyone, for listening. This is the Rollo and Slappy Show. So I'm Slappy Jones, too. And last week we talked about the Olympics and North Korea and the way the media treats it. And is it okay to root for your country, all that stuff. Today, we're talking about horseshoes. But not the game. We're doing horseshoe theory. You know, typically people think of the left and right as a straight line. You got the far left on one side and the far right on the other side. You got communism on one side, fascism on the other. But the horseshoe theory says that you kind of take that line and bend it, and the extremes are pretty close to each other, closer to each other than they would be to the center. And we see that all the time. I think there's some evidence to support that theory. And in this episode, specifically, we are going to talk about guns and Muslims. So, Rollo, what does the horseshoe theory, the American left and right, guns and Muslims have to do with each other?
Well, it's funny because they're kind of two separate issues, a little bit related, and the left and right for each side take two totally different positions.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, when you think about it, they're actually, not, how do I want to say this? In people's minds, they're almost the same issue.
Right.
Right, because people are dying.
Right, it gets treated the same. If you take it more generally, it is the same issue.
Like when you talk to us, yeah, they're totally different, right?
But yeah, if you take it more generally, you say someone goes out and kills a bunch of people, murders them. And so there's two sides. There's not only two sides, but there's two main sides of thinking about what to do as a response. The one side says that, well, the government should create a law or be more strict with how it enforces laws or make the laws stricter to prevent something like this from happening again. And the other side says, well, that's not really fair to all the people who aren't doing anything wrong that fit into that group that's being penalized by your new and or stricter laws. What we should be doing is blaming the actual criminals, the perpetrators of these violent acts, and really try to figure out what makes them tick and why they're committing these crimes.
Right. And is there ways to prevent it in the future?
Right. So really the one side, the former position that I said, where, make laws and everything, it's really just symptom treating. It's not really finding the root cause of what the problem is. So if we branch that out a little bit, not branch it out, but talk about the guns versus the Muslims, I think it's pretty obvious. If you went on McFlugel.com and saw the picture that we have posted here, it's the Sudden Clarity Clarence saying something like gun owners and Muslims. That they're the same exact issue for both for conservatives and leftists, for left and right. So we just had another shooting at a school, which was terrible, obviously. And so the left wants to, of course, they're out there again saying we need to ban guns, we need to ban guns, we need to ban guns.
Yeah, and just not to go too far off topic, but they want to ban assault rifles, is what they say, and specifically they'd always like to talk about AR-15s. But what I find interesting is that's a very small percentage of the murders in this country are done with rifles.
Exactly, and
the overwhelming majority is handguns, and you never hear people talking about banning handguns.
Right, and that brings up another good point, which is relevant to what we're talking about, is how many bad arguments there are about with gun laws. There's an article I saw where the author was saying that he was describing that a gunshot wound from a handgun is like getting a bullet pushed into you or something. Whereas getting shot by quote unquote an assault rifle like an AR-15 was like, bullets were ripping through you and everything.
Right.
That is just completely and utterly ignorant. I mean, just because the gun is big and scary looking doesn't mean it's gonna, you know, rip you apart. Whereas if you load a handgun with a hollow point bullet, that's going to rip you
That'll
apart.
do some damage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's so frustrating hearing these arguments and just, oh, it's easier. I saw one thing where someone said it's easier to buy a gun than it is to vote in this country.
I've seen a lot of things. I
Based
heard
on-
cough medicine. It's easier to buy a gun than cough medicine. It's
Based on what? I mean, how are they making these comparisons? I mean, you can only vote once a year, or maybe twice a year because of primaries in May, and then the elections in November. So just due to the fact that you can, buy a gun more than twice a year, means that it's easier to buy a gun. I mean, it's such a bad comparison, and it's not difficult to vote. I'm pretty sure by any way you compare it, I don't understand how it's easier to buy a gun than it is to vote. You go to your polling place, you walk up, you tell them your name. They don't even card you. Ask for an ID.
I don't think I've ever. Maybe the first time I voted, I don't remember, but I've never. I mean, I haven't voted.
Yeah, it's been a while since I voted, so maybe times have changed. I doubt it.
Yeah, I don't know. Actually, that's a good point. But one I heard was that it's easier to buy cough medicine, harder to buy cough medicine than it is to buy a rifle. And if that is indeed, I've never had an issue buying cough medicine. But if that's the case, shouldn't the question be, why is it so hard to buy cough medicine? Like, let's make that easier.
Yeah.
People have runny noses and they're coughing. Shouldn't we want them to get help?
Apparently not.
No.
Just want to make life more difficult for everyone. And I get it. I get that most people, they have good intentions. There are just some people that hate guns and hate gun owners. But I think the vast majority of people, the average person that sees a tragedy like this and wants to, use the state to make laws to prevent this from happening. I think they're well-intentioned, but just misinformed. But it's frustrating because you can say that about the other side too, and we can transition to the Muslim thing.
Well, one more note on this before we move on to the Muslim side, because I want to throw this in, because another thing I hear over the past couple of days several times is these guns belong in the hands of the police and the military, not out on the streets with general public. And that's one of the most, I don't know, maybe the scariest thought any person could ever have. I mean, imagine if the Afghanis didn't have assault weapons, or the Vietnamese, or the Afghans beat the Soviets and they're doing well against the United States, and the IRA in Ireland against the British, and I mean the list goes on and on. But there is a real need for these kind of weapons to protect yourself from anyone, really. Let's be honest. I mean, why should someone's protection matter? Like, if you're scared, I want to protect myself, I should be able to protect myself by any means.
Right. And if we, I know that this falls on deaf ears for a lot of people, but if I have a right to own a gun, I don't need a reason. I know people like to say that. What reason do you have for owning an AR? Well,
why does anyone need an AR? Nobody needs a semi-automatic gun. Well, who are you to say that?
What they don't realize is that most handguns are semi-automatic. It's very rare to not have a semi-automatic handgun. That's just the ignorance showing through, because people don't I don't know what people think semi-automatic means.
Well, it says automatic in it.
Yeah. And the gun looks scary.
Right.
But
yeah, I mean that's something I think is very important. If there's one group of people you don't want to have all the guns, it's them.
Exactly.
And you can see the increase in SWAT raids. I mean, what's that? what's it up 8,000% since the 1980s SWAT raids on civilians.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's the
and
same people that decry the police abuse and police brutality are the ones saying that they should be the only ones having the guns.
yeah,
What do you
that's
think
not
they're
a
going to
good
use
thing.
them?
And I don't think I'm not here to say like, you know, I don't know, the individual cop, he's not thinking like, sweet, they don't have guns, but it's going to hit their subconscious for sure. That's why probably SWAT raids are up, way up over the last 10, 15 years than they were the previous 10, 15 years. Um, the more militarized the police get, the more helpless we are, especially if they restrict what law abiding citizens are allowed to own. Because
Right.
the only people getting rid of the guns, are the people who follow the law. Um, and hey, they've done such a wonderful job with drugs, so why not try it on guns?
Yeah.
Because there's not a single seventh grader in this country who isn't a phone call away from heroin if they want it.
Yeah, basically. And so
Okay,
it's frustrating. Well, yeah, it's frustrating. We have all this ignorant talk about guns and gun owners when the vast majority of gun owners are perfectly peaceful.
well, they always talk about how many millions and millions. There's more guns in this country than people. Well, you know, not everyone who owns a gun is that. I mean, a very, very small. I mean, mine. You probably couldn't even measure the number of gun owners who kill people versus don't kill people.
Right.
It's so tiny. To make that stat that there's so many guns in the United States also has another problem. Like, hey, you know what? If I could have a world with no guns, I might be in favor of that. You know, why not? If you could get rid of them, but they exist. They're there. If you make them illegal, they're not just going to go away. They're not going to disappear off the earth. They're out there. And the fact that guns do exist, you should be able to defend yourself with as much firepower that could possibly be coming at you.
Right. So we talked about this ignorance about guns and gun owners. And so when we flip it over to talking about terrorism and Muslims, is there any difference to the arguments, especially about and I guess it's a little bit more offensive to a lot of people that you could just mischaracterize and stereotype an ethnic group or a religion. I know we're going to be calling them Muslims a lot, but really, it's Arabs or anyone who's kind of has brown skin color, comes from that region. A lot of these people don't even bother to differentiate between these things.
No, but I think it's in their case. I mean, I think it's kind of fair to call them Muslims, even though they don't really. I mean, I don't know, because I think Christians from the Middle East, I think they'd be more open to letting the Christians in.
Wait, what do you mean?
Like, I'm talking about Republicans. Or do you disagree?
Oh, well, I'm just talking about the terrorism, not necessarily
yeah.
about immigration yet. Sorry.
Okay, gotcha.
But there's all sorts of bad information about Arabs and Muslims too, about what their motivations are. I mean, a terrorist attack happens, and what's the first thing you hear from rah-rah Republican? It's that, well, they hate us for our freedom, or they hate Christianity, or they hate
girls
our
wearing
culture.
skirts,
Right?
Yeah, TV shows, and you name it.
And just like how there's countless gun owners that are not hurting anyone, there are countless Muslims living in this country and around the world who aren't hurting anyone either. So do we really want to punish them for the actions of a few that is obviously horrible? And you don't have to go around and pull everyone that has a similarity, any sort of similarity to the person that commits a terrible crime to make sure that they also say it's terrible. And if they're not out there, beating their chests and saying, this was terrible, it was wrong, and it doesn't represent me, I think that's insane to require that of people.
Pew Research estimates, so the census doesn't ask about religion, evidently. But Pew Research estimates there's 3.45 million Muslims living in the United States. If there is any percentage at all of them who are terrorists, we'd be done. We'd be screwed. There's no way you can stop any percentage of 3.45 million from killing innocent people because they don't like living here, which is kind of weird that they live here.
Right. Well, it's
If
they.
they really hate the United States, what they're invading and taking over and making the whole world Sharia law. Is that the argument?
I guess, and I guess they're just kind of waiting for the right. I don't know,
The right number they're building
or
up,
the
and then
right
they're going to attack.
opportunity that they'll use
Yeah,
that one cherry picked quote of smile and shake their hand or something,
yeah.
but curse them. But this is it made me think of another thing, kind of in the same vein, and I'm actually using this as a serious point. But if you look at the agricultural industry, it's pretty dangerous. It's one of the more dangerous industries out there. A lot of accidents can happen on the farm. And a little while ago, I was going through my the manual for my tractor, and on the back it has this like big warning, and it says, "Look, we do everything we can to make this tractor safe, but it's up to the operator to make sure he uses the equipment safely. Otherwise, you're putting yourself at risk." So, like I said, agricultural accidents happen and everything, but we don't sit there every time one happens. We don't sit there and say the evil tractor companies or evil agricultural equipment or the evil agricultural industry is out there to hurt people. It's absurd.
Well, obviously,
you look at what like the causes of it.
Because you're one of those tractor nuts.
That's true.
What amendment is that?
Yeah,
So of course you're going to say that.
the 154 amendment.
Anyway, I got us off track. Sorry.
Yeah. But it's just, you can't look at, and I guess the difference there, they'll say, well, it's just you're hurting yourself. Well, maybe you're hurting your farm hands too, if they're not trained how to use it well. But the point's there. I mean, it's people like to pick and choose what they get really upset about and want to just say, oh, this should be banned. Let's get rid of this because there's no way to separate this from the good ones from the bad ones. Or they just set it up to make it impossible for either the quote-unquote good owners or the good Muslims or Arabs away from all the ones that are out there to do evil. So you can't even have a conversation about it. It's so frustrating.
Well, if you have nothing to hide, why should you care about background checks?
Yeah, it's true. Are you talking about for Muslims or for guns?
Muslims
right
and gun owners,
Yeah.
both of them. They're both the same. I mean, you know, both. The left will say because you have no right to know. You don't have to treat these people like they're criminals, even though they're not. You have no evidence that they're criminals, but you're treating them like such.
Right.
And then on the other side, they say no one should own a gun unless.
Yeah, I mean they'll make the correct argument that it's absurd to make any given Muslim or Arab prove that he's not a terrorist.
Right, and the right and the left, they just flop on the issue.
Right, because they'll say that, oh no, you have to go through all these background checks and all this other assortment. I don't even know what they want gun owners to have to go through.
I think they just want to make them illegal. I mean, the laws have done so much. We made murder illegal. We made gun-free zones. I mean, they're both doing so well. I don't know what the problem is. Why don't you just get off your love of guns and just make them illegal? Which is funny because they all call people. When you get hurt, who do they call? Someone who has a gun to come help them. So,
yeah,
namely the police.
Well, and what's funny is that they say that they want the police only having those guns, but the police don't walk around with rifles normally. I mean, they normally have them they have them in the trunks of their car a lot, but their service weapon is a handgun.
Right.
That's what they're going to grab right away. So they don't necessarily feel the need to be that well armed. when they could, if they wanted to, I guess. They could get out of their car and go grab their rifle out of the trunk if they wanted to, but they normally don't.
Right.
So that was for the. I didn't tie that back to the guy that said that handguns are, like pushing a bullet into you or something. Whatever he said, it was absolutely absurd.
All those cops pushing bullets into people.
Right. It just just kind of breaks the skin. It's just
Yeah.
just kind of an inconvenience if you get hit.
It's more of a tickle.
If someone shoots you with a handgun, I mean, you kind of go,
bounces off you.
well, that wasn't very nice.
Right.
You scoundrel. So, it's funny because the more we got into and talked about it, that just kind of it's incredible how if you just played Mad Libs with this, you couldn't tell the difference between the right and left on these issues. Like literally. It's absurd.
Right, and it's funny how you think like the communists hate the fascists hate the communists. They will both want a strong central government. They both want to control the means of production. They both want to redistribute the wealth to where they see fit. I mean, it's kind of funny. Just thinking of this horseshoe, what do you think of this? This is something that I've heard Thaddeus Russell say, that the 21st century liberals, the left, are no different than the 17th century Puritans or 18th century Puritan, whenever Puritanism was popular.
Yeah, I think there's definitely comparisons to be made there.
I mean, they would consider them. If you said that to a liberal today who is like, for whatever they're for, transgender or I don't know, they would think that's crazy. You're saying we're Puritans? Well, it's not. Yeah, it's not even enough to like tolerate. You have to actively accept their views. Otherwise, you should be fired. You should not be allowed. You're a Nazi. You're the devil.
Yeah, and that reminds me, we got to talk about. Weren't we supposed to talk about Thaddeus Russell this week?
We were thinking about it.
Yeah, maybe next week. I think that'd be a good episode.
Yeah, he's got some great ideas and other ones that I disagree with, but he's an interesting guy.
Oh yeah. So I don't know. Do you have anything else you wanted to add other than that they're just like literally the same thing on these issues, and it's absurd.
Yeah, well, they both cry to government when they want protection.
That's true.
And that's the problem.
Absolutely. So, free market success story. I had one.
You got one. Yeah.
I had a lot of my family over this weekend, and we were watching TV and showing different videos. And it was really neat because you could literally take my remote control, press a button, and say, play so-and-so video on YouTube. And YouTube.
So you showed your family a ton of Ron Paul speeches.
Yeah. Actually, it was like, what did I show them? All goofy videos. My nephews were there trying to make them dance and stuff. Have some fun. But you can literally, talk into the remote control and say a command to watch YouTube videos, and the YouTube videos pop up. Or I can be on my phone and cast whatever videos on my phone onto the TV. And just YouTube in general. I mean, I was talking to my brother about it. When we were, little kids, if you wanted to watch something, you either had to hope it was on TV and watch it when it came on, or, and we didn't really have a VCR until later on. Actually, I think we did have a VCR since I was alive. Yeah, we always did have a VCR. Or you could maybe record it on the VCR and watch it later.
The quality was not as good.
Right. Or you had to go out into the video store and rent or buy the movie if you could find it, if it was available. Nowadays, between movies and TV shows being on demand, you've got Netflix, Amazon Prime, YouTube, Hulu, all sorts of streaming services. You could still buy physical copies of things. It's
Or digital
insane.
copies.
Right,
You can
or
buy them
digital
for
copies.
TV.
Yeah, it's insane. Like the access to all this stuff is just like it's at your fingertips, and it's something that it kind of slowly happens, but we still kind of take it for granted. But it's
But
amazing.
that slowly is like relative. I mean,
Right.
we're talking like we remember when you couldn't do any of this. We're not that old.
I remember when YouTube just came out. I remember the first video I watched. My friend on here's another blast from the past. AOL Instant Messenger
Yeah.
sent me a link to Ren and Stimpy, and he said, "Hey, it's this website, and they've got full episodes of Ren and Stimpy." And I was like, "Oh, that's great." I remember clicking on it and being like, "I don't know, this could be not a good website with all sorts of viruses and everything," because that's what you're worried about back then. Whenever you got something cool, it was probably loading your computer up with nasty stuff. So, and then look at where we are now. We're actually using the YouTube platform, like YouTube through Google Hangouts to schedule this call. So, and if we wanted to, we could stream this live, but we tend to not want to do that because who knows what happens on some of these episodes that you don't actually get to hear. But it's just really an amazing thing. So, I don't know. Do you have anything to add to that, Slappy?
No, I think that's it. I mean, this stuff was, maybe it was imaginable. Like, could you imagine a time where you could just watch whatever you wanted on TV? That would be awesome. But it was never seemed like a possibility when I was a kid.
No, and it's funny. And I wrote an article about this, where it was in Hermann Hoppe's book, God, the Democracy That Fails. He was saying that, talking about some place where they wanted to give kids wanted the right to vote or something, and he said, can you imagine that? Kids would just want, I forget all the things he said that they would have the government do, but one of them was free videos. And he wrote it some years ago, before, back in the time we were talking about when we were younger. And it just shows how well the market works, that basically the kids have free videos now, but it was through the market. And massive amounts of wealth got created as a result of it.
Right. That's what I was going to say. I mean, he put that example out there to be absurd. And that was in 2001, less than 20 years ago.
Yeah. So it was when we were kind of older. We weren't even little kids back then.
No, that would have been my senior year of high school. So,
yeah.
And, he puts that out there to say how crazy it is. If kids were voting, they'd vote for free candy and free videos and, and just a couple years later, I mean, when did YouTube come around? I think that was
2006.
Yeah, 2006. And not that long after he wrote that, they had the ability to get free videos online. I mean, pretty incredible.
Yep.
And that's not to sound like we're trashing Hopp on that point. That's just to say how amazing, because that's a believer in the free market, and even he couldn't have seen that.
Right. Exactly. And that's why we don't want any single entity or person or group controlling the market, because no one has any idea what's coming up next.
Exactly. Nobody knows. I mean, iPhones didn't exist. Well, I guess they did 10 years ago, but just 10 years ago. Now people make a living off them.
Yeah. It's really amazing.
It is.
So, again, the show notes page for this episode is mcflugel.com/79. You'll find links to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and YouTube, as well as a way to subscribe to our email list, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter. So with that, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
Yeah, hey, one more thing. If you want to support the show, the website, and you shop on Amazon, and you're going to shop there anyway, if you click our link, a little bit of commission comes to us.
Oh, yeah. That'll be on the show notes page.
Might as well throw that out there. It's on the show notes page. It doesn't cost you anything. And if you like what we're doing, hey, you can throw a couple bucks our way that way. We're not asking for donations. Yeah,
it'll be like we'll finally make ourselves whole on that free rider episode we did a while ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Where we found out we weren't making internet money by doing this.
Right. Well, that's why we put that link up there. So anyway, we'll catch you next week.
See ya.
Peace.